I was just finishing up a report when my inbox pinged. The sender's name made my heart skip a beat. Nathaniel Black. Why the hell was the CEO emailing me? I clicked it open, half expecting it to be some kind of mistake. Alex, it started. I'd like to invite you to a private lunch in my office tomorrow at noon. I stared at the screen, my stomach doing flips. A private lunch? With him? What did he want with me? I wasn't even sure if he knew I was just another cog in the Black Enterprises machine. I leaned back in my chair, the hum of the office around me fading into the background. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of this. Maybe it was about my recent project. Maybe he wanted to congratulate me. But then again, CEOs don't usually do that sort of thing themselves. My phone buzzed, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was a text from Sarah, my colleague and friend. "Drinks after work?" she asked. I quickly typed back, "Can't. Meeting with Nathaniel Black tomorrow." Her response was almost immediate, "What?" Followed by a string of emojis that pretty much captured how I was feeling: excited, confused, and maybe a little scared. I didn't reply. I couldn't. Instead, I sat there, staring at that email, trying to figure out what the hell was going on. My pulse was still hammering in my ears as I forwarded the email to my work calendar, feeling the weight of whatever was going to happen tomorrow pressing down on me. The next day, I stood in front of the elevator doors, feeling like I was about to step into a lion's den. My palms were sweaty, and I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. I tried to play it cool, smoothing down my tie, but inside I was a mess. As the elevator dinged and the doors slid open, I forced myself to take a deep breath and stepped inside. The ride up to the top floor was torturously slow. I watched the numbers climb, each one bringing me closer to Nathaniel Black. What the hell did he want from me? My mind ran wild with possibilities, none of them comforting. I kept replaying yesterday's email in my head. It was so brief, almost cryptic. No hint of what this lunch was about, no context. Just that he wanted to meet. The elevator jerked to a stop at the top floor, and the doors opened with a soft chime. Stepping out, I was greeted by the cool, modern elegance of the executive suite. Polished floors, sleek furniture, everything screamed power and money. The receptionist smiled at me a knowing smile, like she was in on some secret. "Mr. Black is expecting you, Alex. You can go right in." I nodded, my throat too dry to speak. As I walked down the hall, each step echoed ominously. The closer I got to his office, the more my anxiety spiked. I could hear the murmur of voices behind the thick doors, his voice, smooth and confident, and then silence. I reached for the door handle, my hand trembling slightly. "Get a grip," I told myself, and with a final, shaky breath, I pushed the door open. Nathaniel was standing by the window, his back to me, silhouetted against the city skyline. He turned as I entered, his gaze sharp and appraising. "Alex, glad you could make it," he said, his tone as smooth as silk. I swallowed hard and managed a nod. "Mr. Black," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "Nathaniel," he corrected, flashing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "No need for formalities today." "All right." "Nathaniel," I said, trying to match his casual tone but failing miserably. The air between us crackled with unspoken tension, and I knew this lunch was going to be anything but ordinary. Nathaniel gestured toward the dining table set up in the corner of his office. "Please have a seat," he said, his voice warm, but with an edge I couldn't quite place. I walked over, feeling the weight of his gaze on me the entire time. The table was set for two, the kind of setup you'd expect in a high-end restaurant, not an office. Crystal glasses, fine china, and a bottle of wine chilling in a silver bucket. I sat down, trying to ignore the nervous flutter in my chest. Nathaniel joined me, sitting across the table, close enough that I could catch a hint of his cologne, something expensive and understated. He poured us both a glass of wine, the deep red liquid swirling in the glass like a slow, deliberate temptation. "To new opportunities," he said, raising his glass. His eyes locked onto mine, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was talking about more than just work. "To new opportunities," I echoed, clinking my glass against his, my hand steady even as my mind spun with questions. As we began to eat, Nathaniel led the conversation with ease, asking me about my work, my ideas, my aspirations. It was disarming how effortlessly he drew me out, how quickly the tension seemed to melt away under his attentive gaze and well-timed smiles. I found myself talking more than I intended, revealing bits of my life I usually kept private. But as smooth as our conversation was, there was something beneath the surface, an undercurrent of intensity in the way he watched me, in the way his words seemed to have layers of meaning. Every question felt like it was probing deeper, every compliment like it carried a hidden agenda. "I've been following your work closely," Nathaniel said, leaning back slightly, his fingers tracing the rim of his wine glass. "You have a unique perspective, one that I think could take you far. But it's not just your work that interests me." His words hung in the air, charged with an implication that made my pulse quicken. I didn't know how to respond, so I sipped my wine, letting the silence stretch just a moment too long. Nathaniel's smile widened, as if he knew exactly what he was doing. "I believe in understanding the people who make this company great, and you, Alex, have caught my attention." My heart skipped a beat. This was more than just a lunch, more than just a conversation about work. There was something else here, something unspoken but palpable, and it made my skin prickle with a mix of anticipation and uncertainty. Just as Nathaniel's words hung in the air, the lights flickered. I barely had time to register the change before the entire office was plunged into darkness. The hum of the air conditioning died, replaced by an eerie silence. For a second, neither of us moved, the sudden shift in atmosphere leaving us both momentarily stunned. Then the emergency lights kicked in, casting a dim, almost ghostly glow across the room. Nathaniel was the first to react. "Well, that's unexpected," he said, his voice calm, but there was a tension in his eyes that hadn't been there before. I forced a laugh, trying to shake off the unease creeping up my spine. "Looks like lunch is going to get a little more interesting," I said, but even to my own ears, my voice sounded strained. Nathaniel stood up, his movements smooth and controlled. "Stay close," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He moved toward his desk, pulling out his phone to check for updates. The light from the screen illuminated his face, and I could see a frown forming as he read something. "There's a citywide blackout," he said, finally looking up. "It might take a while for the power to come back." Great, I thought, just what I needed, being stuck in a dark office with the CEO whose intentions I still couldn't quite figure out. But there was no backing out now. "What do we do?" I asked, more out of a need to fill the silence than anything else. Nathaniel looked at me, a glint of something almost playful in his eyes. "We make the most of it," he said. He moved with purpose, opening a drawer and pulling out a set of candles. Within moments, the room was bathed in a warm, flickering light that softened the sharp edges of the office and somehow made the situation feel even more intimate. He set the candles on the table between us, the flames dancing as if they were sharing in some private joke. "Looks like we'll have to improvise," Nathaniel said, that easy smile back on his lips. "I think we can still enjoy the rest of our lunch, don't you?" There was something almost seductive in the way he said it, as if the darkness had given him permission to drop the professional pretense. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and sat back down at the table. The shadows played across his face, making him look both mysterious and dangerously alluring. As we resumed our meal, the atmosphere between us shifted. The power outage had turned what was already a strange lunch into something more, something charged with an unspoken tension that neither of us seemed willing to address directly. But it was there, hanging between us, as undeniable as the candlelight that flickered on the table. As the meal continued under the warm glow of candlelight, Nathaniel seemed to relax even more, his earlier intensity shifting into something more personal, almost vulnerable. He poured us another glass of wine, the rich red liquid catching the light as it filled the glasses. "You know," he began, swirling the wine in his glass, "there's something about moments like this that strips away all the noise. No distractions, no interruptions, just two people talking." I nodded, feeling the truth of his words settle over me. The usual hustle of the office felt miles away, replaced by the quiet intimacy of our candlelit lunch. I took a sip of wine, letting the warmth spread through me, trying to steady the racing thoughts in my mind. Nathaniel leaned back in his chair, studying me with those sharp eyes of his. "I've always believed that understanding someone's struggles tells you more about them than their successes," he said, his voice soft but probing. "So tell me, Alex, what's been your biggest challenge since you joined Black Enterprises?" The question caught me off guard. I wasn't expecting him to dig so deep, especially not in this setting. But there was something about the way he asked, the genuine curiosity in his tone, that made it impossible to brush off. I hesitated, then decided to take a leap. "Honestly, It's been the pressure to stand out. In a place this big, it's easy to feel like just another face in the crowd. Sometimes I wonder if anything I do really matters. Nathaniel nodded, his expression thoughtful. I get that, he said quietly. When I first took over the company, I felt the same way. Like I was constantly trying to prove myself, even though I was already at the top. It's a strange kind of loneliness. His admission surprised me. Nathaniel Black, the powerful CEO, felt like this too. It made him seem more human, more relatable. I found myself opening up even more, telling him about the nights I spent obsessing over details, trying to perfect every project, afraid that one mistake would send me back to square one. He listened intently, never interrupting, just letting me pour out my thoughts. And when I finally paused, he leaned forward, his gaze locking onto mine. You're not just another face in the crowd, Alex. You've got something special, something I recognized from the moment I saw your work. His words hit me harder than I expected. I wanted to believe him, but there was still that nagging doubt, the fear that maybe he was just saying what I wanted to hear. But before I could overthink it, he continued. Everything happens for a reason, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Maybe this blackout is one of those moments. A chance for us to really connect, beyond the roles we play at work. I felt a shiver run down my spine, not from fear, but from the intensity of the moment. The room seemed to shrink around us, the flickering candlelight making everything else fade into the background. It was just us, Nathaniel and me, sharing things we'd never spoken about before, and it felt right. I think you're right, I murmured, surprised by how much I meant it. Nathaniel smiled, a soft, genuine smile that made my heart skip a beat. I'm glad you think so, he said, his voice warm and inviting, like he was letting me into a part of his world that few ever saw. And in that moment, with the shadows dancing around us and the air thick with unspoken possibilities, I realized that whatever this was, whatever it could become, I was ready to see where it would lead. Nathaniel leaned back, his eyes never leaving mine, as if searching for something in my gaze. The room was quiet, the only sound the faint flicker of the candle flames. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on us, a charged silence that neither of us seemed eager to break. So he said finally, his voice soft but clear, what about outside of work? What makes you tick, Alex? What do you want that you haven't gone after yet? The question caught me off guard. It was personal, more than I'd expected, but the way he asked made it impossible to shrug off. There was no judgment in his tone, just genuine curiosity, and that made me want to answer honestly. I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. I guess. I've always wanted to do something that matters, not just climb the corporate ladder, but really make a difference. I just don't know what that looks like yet. Nathaniel nodded slowly, as if he understood more than he let on. I can relate to that, he said, a hint of something deeper in his voice. It's easy to get caught up in the game, chasing success, power, and forgetting why you started in the first place. His words struck a chord. We were both playing the same game, just at different levels, and suddenly the distance between us didn't seem so vast. I realized that, for all his power and success, Nathaniel wasn't that different from me searching for something more, something real. As the conversation flowed, I found myself relaxing, the earlier tension melting away. We shared stories, some funny, others more serious, and with each exchange, the connection between us grew. It wasn't just about work anymore, it was about who we were beneath the titles, beneath the expectations. Nathaniel's gaze softened as he spoke about his past, moments of vulnerability that made him seem more human, more accessible. When I first took over Black Enterprises, I thought I had to be this invincible leader, he admitted, a wry smile playing on his lips. But the truth is, I was terrified of failing, of not living up to everyone's expectations. I leaned forward, drawn in by his honesty. I can't imagine you being scared of anything, I said, half joking, but the sincerity in his eyes made me realize just how real his fears had been. Oh, I've been scared plenty, he replied, his smile fading into something more serious. But fear has a way of teaching you what really matters. It strips away the bullshit and forces you to face who you are and what you really want. There was a pause, a moment where everything seemed to hang in the balance. I could feel the unspoken tension between us, the way his words resonated with something deep inside me. It wasn't just about his story or mine, it was about the possibility of something more, something neither of us had dared to acknowledge until now. Before I could respond, Nathaniel leaned in slightly, his gaze intense but not threatening. "Alex, I don't usually get this personal with anyone from work, but there's something about you, something that makes me want to break my own rules." My breath caught in my throat, the air between us thick with anticipation. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the struggle between what was right and what he wanted, and in that moment I realized I wanted the same thing. "Maybe some rules are meant to be broken," I said quietly, the words slipping out before I could second-guess them. Nathaniel's eyes darkened with a mixture of desire and something else, something I couldn't quite place but knew was just as powerful. He didn't say anything, but the look he gave me spoke volumes. This was real, whatever it was, and it was up to us to decide where it would lead. Nathaniel's gaze held mine, the air between us thick with everything left unsaid. I could feel the pull, the magnetic tension that had been building all afternoon. He leaned forward just a fraction, and for a moment I thought he might close the distance between us. But instead he paused, his eyes searching mine as if looking for permission, or perhaps a sign that I felt the same pull he did. "Alex," he began, his voice low, almost hesitant, a side of him I hadn't seen before. "There's something I need to say, but I don't want to make you uncomfortable." His sudden vulnerability caught me off guard. This was the same man who commanded boardrooms, who exuded confidence and control, now hesitating like a man unsure of his next move. It made him seem more real, more human, and it stirred something inside me, something that made me want to hear whatever he was holding back. "You can tell me," I said softly, trying to steady the pounding in my chest. "Whatever it is, just say it." Nathaniel looked down for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts, before meeting my gaze again. "From the moment I first saw you," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "I felt something different. I didn't understand it at first, tried to ignore it, even. But it's been there, just beneath the surface, growing stronger every day." His words hung in the air, each one hitting me with a mix of surprise and something deeper, something that made my pulse quicken and my mind race. I wanted to respond, to say something that would let him know he wasn't alone in this, but the intensity of the moment left me speechless. He continued, his tone still gentle but filled with an emotion I hadn't expected. "I've spent years building walls, keeping things professional, never letting anything or anyone get too close. But with you, Alex, I don't know how to keep those walls up." My breath caught in my throat, the raw honesty in his words cutting through any doubt I might have had. This wasn't just a passing fancy for him, it was real, and it terrified him as much as it did me. "Nathaniel," I started, my voice trembling slightly, Before I could finish, he reached across the table, his hand brushing mine. The touch was light, almost tentative, but it sent a jolt of electricity through me. His eyes locked onto mine, a silent question in them, asking for something he didn't know how to voice. I turned my hand over, letting our fingers intertwine, the simple gesture carrying more weight than any words could. The tension that had been building between us all day finally snapped, replaced by a quiet understanding. We were both in uncharted territory, and neither of us knew exactly where it would lead, but we were in it together. Nathaniel squeezed my hand gently, his thumb brushing over my knuckles in a slow, deliberate caress. "This isn't just about the company, or our roles here," he said, his voice firmer now, as if he'd made a decision. "It's about us, about something I've never let myself want, until now." The room seemed to close in around us, the candlelight flickering like it was sharing in our secret. I could feel my heart pounding, every beat echoing in the silence. This was at a moment of truth, where we had to decide if we were going to take the leap or walk away. I took a deep breath, the weight of the decision pressing down on me, but I knew what I wanted, what I needed. I felt it too, I admitted, my voice barely more than a whisper. But I didn't think. I didn't know if you felt the same way. Nathaniel's eyes softened, a slow smile spreading across his face. "I do," he said simply, the words carrying all the certainty I needed. "And if you're willing, I'd like to see where this goes. No expectations, no pressure, just..." The relief that washed over me was almost overwhelming. I squeezed his hand back, a smile tugging at my lips. "I'd like that," I replied, feeling a strange mix of excitement and calm settle over me. Whatever happened next, we'd figure it out together. Nathaniel's smile deepened, and for the first time the tension between us melted away completely, replaced by something warmer, more genuine. He didn't let go of my hand, and I didn't want him to. This was new, uncharted territory for both of us, but it felt right, like we were exactly where we were supposed to be. The room was heavy with unspoken words, the air thick with anticipation. We sat there, hands intertwined, neither of us making the next move, but the pull between us was undeniable. My heart raced, each beat echoing in my ears, but for once I wasn't overthinking. I was just there, in the moment, with him. Nathaniel's eyes searched mine, as if asking for permission to cross that final line. His thumb brushed against my hand, sending a shiver up my spine. The tension was palpable, a quiet intensity that made every second feel like it stretched into eternity. Without thinking, I found myself leaning in, closing the distance between us. Nathaniel didn't hesitate. He met me halfway, his movements deliberate yet tender, like he was savoring the moment as much as I was. The first brush of his lips against mine was tentative, almost cautious, as if he was afraid to break the spell we'd created. But the moment our lips touched, it was like something clicked into place, a connection that had been simmering beneath the surface finally igniting. The kiss deepened, and all the tension, the unspoken feelings, and the uncertainty seemed to melt away, replaced by a warmth that spread through my entire body. It was soft at first, exploratory, like we were both testing the waters. But as the seconds passed, it became something more, something raw and real. Nathaniel's hand moved to the back of my neck, pulling me closer, as if he couldn't stand the thought of even a millimeter of space between us. I responded in kind, my free hand sliding up to cup his jaw, feeling the slight stubble beneath my fingers. The kiss was everything, gentle yet insistent, slow yet filled with an urgency that spoke of everything we hadn't said out loud. When we finally pulled back, both of us were breathing hard, the reality of what had just happened settling over us like a soft blanket. Nathaniel's forehead rested against mine, his eyes still closed, as if he was trying to hold on to the moment for just a little longer. "Wow," I breathed, the words slipping out before I could stop it. Nathaniel chuckled softly, his breath warm against my skin. "Yeah, wow," he echoed, his voice tinged with something I couldn't quite place, relief, maybe, or perhaps the same sense of disbelief that I was feeling. We stayed like that for a moment, neither of us wanting to break the fragile connection we'd just formed. The world outside didn't matter right now, no titles, no expectations, just the two of us, wrapped up in each other. Finally, Nathaniel pulled back just enough to look at me, his eyes searching mine for any sign of regret. But there was none, just a quiet certainty that this was exactly where I wanted to be. "I'm glad we did that," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of all the things we weren't saying. "Me too," I replied, a smile tugging at the corners of my lips. There was no doubt in my mind anymore. Whatever this was, whatever it could become, I wanted to see it through. Nathaniel's hand still rested on the back of my neck, his thumb tracing small circles that sent shivers down my spine. "I've wanted to do that for a long time," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I leaned into his touch, feeling a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the candlelight. "So have I confessed," the words coming easier than I expected. It felt good to finally say it, to let go of the uncertainty that had been holding me back. His smile widened, and for the first time since I'd entered his office, I saw a softness in his eyes that made my heart ache in the best possible way. This was more than just a kiss, this was the start of something neither of us had expected, but both of us were ready to explore. "Where do we go from here?" I asked, my voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside me. Nathaniel's hand moved to cup my cheek, his thumb brushing against my skin in a way that made my breath hitch. "We take it one step at a time," he said, his tone filled with quiet confidence. "No rush, no pressure, just us, figuring this out together." I nodded, the simplicity of his words settling over me like a calming balm. "I can do that," I replied, and for the first time the future didn't seem so daunting. It felt full of possibilities, and I was ready to embrace whatever came next. Nathaniel leaned in again, pressing a soft kiss to my forehead, and it felt like a promise, one that we would keep, no matter what challenges lay ahead. And as we sat there, wrapped up in each other, I knew that whatever this was, it was the beginning of something real. The warmth of the moment lingered between us, but as the candles flickered and the shadows danced on the walls, reality began to creep back in. Nathaniel's hand slowly dropped from my cheek, and I could see the shift in his eyes, a return to the world outside this private bubble we had created. He leaned back slightly, his expression soft but thoughtful. "Alex, as much as I want to stay here and keep this moment going, we need to talk about what this means." The words hit me like a splash of cold water, not because I didn't agree, but because I knew he was right. We couldn't stay in this suspended state forever. The world was still out there, with all its complications and expectations, and we had to face it sooner or later. I nodded, my heart still racing from the kiss, but my mind now shifting to the practicalities. I know, I said, my voice steady, though there was a hint of uncertainty beneath it. Whatever this is, it's not going to be simple. Nathaniel sighed, running a hand through his hair as he leaned back in his chair. No, it's not. But I don't want to ignore it or pretend it didn't happen. I think we need to be honest with ourselves about what we want and how we're going to handle this moving forward. The weight of his words settled over me. He wasn't just talking about us, he was talking about the implications, the potential fallout, the risks. But even as those thoughts raced through my mind, I couldn't bring myself to regret what had happened. If anything, it made me want to fight for whatever this was, no matter how complicated it might be. I'm willing to figure this out, I said, my voice firmer now, but we have to be careful. The last thing I want is to jeopardize our careers or make things more difficult for either of us. Nathaniel's eyes softened at my words, a small, appreciative smile tugging at his lips. Agreed. We'll need to keep this between us, at least for now. There's too much at stake to rush into anything without thinking it through. There was a pause, a moment where we both absorbed the reality of the situation. The intensity of our connection hadn't faded, but it was tempered now by the understanding that we couldn't just dive headfirst without considering the consequences. What do we do next? I asked, breaking the silence. Do we just go back to work like nothing happened? Nathaniel chuckled softly, the sound tinged with irony. We'll have to, at least on the surface. But that doesn't mean we can't explore this slowly. Carefully he leaned forward, his gaze locking onto mine, the intensity back, but now mixed with determination. I'm not willing to let this go, Alex. Not after everything we've just shared. His words sent a thrill through me, despite the gravity of the situation. It wasn't going to be easy, but the fact that he was committed to figuring it out with me made all the difference. Neither am I replied, matching his resolve. We'll take it one step at a time. Like you said, no pressure, no rush, but we won't ignore it either. Nathaniel nodded, his smile returning, and this time it reached his eyes, warming the space between us. Good. Then let's start with that, taking it slow, keeping it between us for now, and seeing where it leads. I felt a sense of relief wash over me. We had a plan, or at least the beginnings of one, and it felt solid. It felt right. As the candles burned lower, casting long shadows on the walls, I realized that this wasn't just about navigating a new relationship, it was about navigating a new chapter in my life, one that I hadn't seen coming but was now eager to embrace. Nathaniel stood up, signaling that our time here was drawing to a close. We should probably get back to reality, he said, though his tone was more playful now, lightening the mood. Yeah, I agreed, standing as well, though I wasn't quite ready to let go of this moment. But we'll figure it out. Together. He walked me to the door, the tension of the earlier conversation giving way to a comfortable silence, a shared understanding. Before I left, Nathaniel placed a hand on my arm, stopping me. One more thing, he said, his voice low, just for me. This doesn't change how I see you at work. You're still one of the best we've got, and I want you to know that. The sincerity in his words warmed me from the inside out. Thanks, Nathaniel, I said, smiling. That means a lot. With a final, lingering look, I stepped out of his office, the door closing softly behind me. As I walked down the hallway, the weight of what had just happened settled over me, not in a burdensome way, but in a way that made me feel stronger, more sure of myself. We had crossed a line, and there was no going back. But whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew we'd face them together, one step at a time. The door to Nathaniel's office clicked shut behind me, and as I walked down the corridor, the familiar hum of the office slowly seeped back into my awareness. But everything felt different now, charged, like I was seeing the world through a new lens. My mind raced with everything that had happened, every word we'd exchanged, every touch that lingered longer than it should have. The taste of his kiss still on my lips, I felt a surge of something that was both exhilarating and terrifying. But I knew one thing for sure, this wasn't just a fleeting moment. This was the beginning of something new, uncharted territory that we'd have to navigate carefully, but it was a path I was willing to walk. The elevator ride back down to my floor felt like it took forever, giving me too much time to think. How were we going to do this? How were we going to keep things professional while exploring whatever this was between us? Questions buzzed in my head, but one answer kept rising above the noise, one step at a time. When the elevator doors slid open, I was greeted by the bustling energy of the office. It felt strange to step back into this world, the one where I was just another employee, where Nathaniel was the untouchable CEO. But now there was this undercurrent of something more, something that connected us in ways no one else knew. I made my way to my desk, my colleagues engrossed in their own tasks, oblivious to the shift that had just taken place in my life. As I sat down, my phone buzzed with a new message. I glanced at the screen, my heart skipping a beat when I saw Nathaniel's name. Remember what we talked about, one step at a time. We've got this. A smile tugged at the corners of my mouth. It was a simple message, but it carried the weight of everything we just shared. He was right, we had this. It wasn't going to be easy, but knowing he was in it with me made all the difference. I typed back a quick response, one step at a time. See you later. Hitting send, I slipped my phone back into my pocket, feeling a strange mix of calm and anticipation settle over me. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and emails, but my mind kept drifting back to Nathaniel. I found myself glancing at the clock, wondering how long it would be before we could steal another moment alone. But I also knew we had to be careful, that this delicate balance we were trying to strike would require patience and trust. As the afternoon sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the office, I realized how much had changed in such a short time. I wasn't just going through the motions anymore. Every decision, every move felt like it had purpose, like I was working towards something bigger than just a paycheck. When the workday finally ended, I packed up my things, trying not to rush as I made my way to the elevator. My thoughts raced ahead of me, wondering if Nathaniel would be waiting, if we'd share a glance, a secret smile before parting ways for the night. The elevator doors slid open on the top floor, and I found myself hesitating, unsure of what to expect. But as I stepped out, I saw Nathaniel leaning casually against the wall, his suit jacket slung over one shoulder, a small smile playing on his lips. Ready to take that first step, he asked, his voice low, meant only for me. I nodded, feeling a warmth spread through me at the sight of him. Ready. He pushed off the wall, falling into step beside me as we walked toward the exit. We didn't need to say anything, the connection between us was enough, a quiet understanding that this was just the beginning. As we stepped out into the cool evening air, the city buzzing with life around us, I felt a sense of calm settle over me. Whatever came next, whatever challenges, whatever joys, I knew we were in this together. Nathaniel glanced over at me, his eyes holding mine for a moment longer than necessary, and I felt that same thrill from earlier, the promise of something more. Let's take it one step at a time, he repeated, more to himself than to me, as if reassuring us both that we could handle whatever came our way. I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in a long time. One step at a time, I echoed, and with that, we walked into the night, ready to face whatever the future held, together.